The cold wind bit through my thin coat as I sat alone in my small New York City apartment that Christmas Eve. I held the chipped mug my son gave me last year, the one he no longer speaks about, the one he pretends doesn't exist. Want a gift? Get a job first, he told me just moments ago, his eyes sharper than the December frost outside. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and I'm 73 years old. I've lived in this same rent-controlled apartment on the Upper West Side for 42 years, watching the neighborhood change around me like seasons that somehow forgot to bring warmth. The radiator clanks its familiar song of struggle, the same rhythm I've danced to for decades, always giving, always hoping, always believing that love would find its way back to me. The smell of stale coffee lingered in my kitchen that evening, mixing with the faint aroma of the cinnamon candle I'd lit earlier. I wanted to create some Christmas magic, something to soften the harsh words that still echoed in the cramped space between my refrigerator and the small table where I ate my meals alone. The candle flickered against the frost-covered window, casting shadows that seemed to mirror the darkness growing in my chest. I wandered to the closet where I kept the Christmas decorations, my arthritic fingers trembling as I touched the ornaments that once brought such joy. Each bauble held a memory: the paper angel my granddaughter Emma made when she was 7, the silver bell my daughter Sarah gave me during better times, the wooden nutcracker my son David carved in high school shop class. Back then, his hands created beauty instead of pointing fingers of blame. My reflection caught in the hallway mirror, and I barely recognized the woman staring back. When did I become so small? When did the woman who once stood tall while scrubbing office floors at midnight, who worked double shifts to pay for piano lessons and soccer uniforms, become this fragile creature who apologized for existing? The phone buzzed against the kitchen counter. A text from David. Mom, did you transfer the money yet? Sarah needs it for Emma's school supplies. No Merry Christmas. No how are you feeling? Just the familiar demand disguised as family responsibility. I sat down heavily in my worn armchair, the one I'd reupholstered 3 times because I couldn't afford to replace it. The fabric was soft from years of tears, both mine and the grandchildren who once climbed into my lap for stories. Now those same grandchildren barely acknowledged my presence at family gatherings, their faces buried in screens while their parents discussed my usefulness over my head. Do you remember when your children were small? When they needed you for everything: scraped knees, broken hearts, nightmares that only your voice could chase away? I thought that need would transform into love, into respect, into the kind of relationship where phone calls brought joy instead of dread. The apartment felt smaller that night, the walls closing in with the weight of 40 years of giving. I'd raised 2 children in these rooms after their father walked away, telling them bedtime stories while I calculated how to stretch $50 until payday. I'd celebrated their graduations while wearing the same dress I'd worn to my own mother's funeral because there was no money for anything new. I remember David's first day of kindergarten. He cried and clung to my legs, begging me not to leave him. I'll always come back for you, I promised, kissing his tear-stained cheek. Mommy will always be here. 35 years later, I kept that promise. But somewhere along the way, he forgot that I was human too. Sarah was different, quieter, more observant. She noticed when I skipped meals so there would be enough food for dinner. She noticed when I wore sweaters with holes because the heat bill was due. When I grow up, I'm going to take care of you, Mama, she whispered one cold February night as I tucked her into bed. I believed her then. I wanted to believe her now. The memories flooded back as I sat in the flickering candlelight. The nights I worked cleaning offices in Manhattan, taking the subway home at 2 a.m. while most of the city slept. I'd count the money in my purse, always calculating, always worried, always putting their needs before my own. I sold my mother's wedding ring to pay for David's college application fees. I took out loans I couldn't afford to help Sarah with her first apartment deposit. You're the strongest woman I know, Mom, David used to say when he was younger, when he needed my strength to face his own challenges. But strength, I learned, can become an expectation. And expectations can become chains. The phone rang, startling me from my memories. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and my heart jumped with hope. Maybe she was calling to wish me Merry Christmas. Maybe she remembered that her mother was still alive, still breathing, still hoping for scraps of love from the children she'd sacrificed everything to raise. Mom, I need to ask you something. Her voice was strained, tired. No hello. No warmth. Emma needs a new laptop for school, and David said you might be able to help us out. It's only $800. Only $800. The words hit me like a physical blow. Only $800 that I didn't have, from a Social Security check that barely covered my rent and medication. Only $800 from the woman who once cleaned other people's toilets so her children could have clean clothes for school. Sarah, honey, Mom, please don't make this difficult. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. You know we'll pay you back. Pay me back. Like the $3,000 David borrowed for his business opportunity that never materialized. Like the $500 Sarah needed for emergency car repairs that somehow became a weekend vacation. Like the countless times I'd been promised repayment that never came, while I ate canned soup for dinner and wore shoes with holes in the soles. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of guilt settling on my shoulders. What kind of mother says no to her grandchild's education? What kind of grandmother puts her own needs before a 16-year-old's future? The voices in my head, their voices, whispered accusations of selfishness, of failing in my most basic duty as the family's eternal provider. I'll see what I can do, I heard myself saying, the words falling from my lips like autumn leaves, dead before they hit the ground. Thanks, Mom. You're the best. The line went dead, leaving me alone with the dial tone and the growing realization that I was nothing more than a human ATM to my own children. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked to the window and looked out at the city that never sleeps, watching the late-night workers trudging home, the couples sharing umbrellas, the families walking together with shopping bags full of Christmas presents. I pressed my palm against the cold glass and wondered when I'd become invisible, even to myself. The next morning brought new challenges. My arthritis medication cost more than expected, and the pharmacy technician's impatient sigh made it clear that my insurance complications were an inconvenience. I counted out wrinkled bills while younger customers tapped their feet behind me, their holiday shopping plans more important than an old woman's pain. I walked home slowly, each step a reminder of the decades I'd spent running, to work, to school functions, to soccer games, to their sides whenever they needed me. Now my own body betrayed me with aches and pains that went unnoticed by the people I'd spent my life serving. At home, I opened my checkbook and stared at the balance. After rent, utilities, medication, and groceries, there wasn't enough for Emma's laptop. There wasn't enough for Christmas presents. There wasn't enough for the small luxuries that might make an old woman feel human again, a decent cup of coffee, a warm coat, a book that wasn't borrowed from the library. I thought about calling Sarah back, explaining the reality of my finances. But I knew what would happen. The sighs. The subtle accusations of being dramatic. The comparisons to other mothers who somehow managed to be more generous, more understanding, more willing to sacrifice for their family's happiness. Instead, I did what I'd done countless times before. I called the bank and arranged to transfer money from my small savings account, the emergency fund I'd built coin by coin over 30 years. $800 that represented security, peace of mind, a buffer against the uncertainties of old age. Gone in an instant to pay for a laptop that Emma would probably replace in 2 years. But even as I made the transfer, something felt different. The familiar rush of maternal satisfaction didn't come. Instead, I felt hollow, empty, like a well that had been drawn upon too many times without ever being refilled. Later that week, David called. Not to check on me, not to ask how I was managing the brutal winter, but to share news about his latest investment opportunity. Mom, I'm telling you, cryptocurrency is the future. Bitcoin is going through the roof. I just need a little seed money to get started, maybe $5,000. $5,000. The number hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had consumed everything valuable in my life. $5,000 that I didn't have, had never had, would never have on my fixed income. But David spoke as if money grew on trees in my tiny apartment, as if my bank account had the magical property of regenerating wealth no matter how often it was emptied. David, I just helped Emma with her laptop. This is different, Mom. This is an investment. You could actually make money instead of just spending it all the time. Spending it all the time. As if my spending was frivolous, wasteful, selfish. As if groceries and medication and rent were luxuries I indulged in while ignoring my children's real needs. I've been researching the stock market too, he continued, his voice gaining excitement. There are these companies that are going to be huge. If we get in now, we could be talking about real wealth, Mom. The kind of money that could change everything for our family. Our family. When had my money become our money? When had my sacrifice become our investment opportunity? I listened to him describe his dreams of fortune, his plans for the millions he was certain would flow from my $5,000 investment. He spoke of buying houses, taking vacations, starting businesses. He painted pictures of a future where money solved every problem and erased every struggle. But he never once mentioned how I would benefit from these imaginary riches. Never once considered that a 73-year-old woman living on Social Security might have dreams of her own, needs of her own, fears about her own financial security. Think about it, Mom, he said before hanging up. This could be the answer to all our problems. All our problems. But what about my problems? What about the nights I lay awake calculating bills, the mornings I skipped breakfast to stretch the grocery budget, the winters I kept the temperature low to save on heating costs? These weren't our problems, they were my problems, carried alone in the darkness of my small apartment while my children dreamed of the wealth they expected me to provide. That evening, I found myself looking through old photo albums, tracing faces that smiled back at me from better times. There was David at 10, gap-toothed and proud in his little league uniform that I'd worked overtime to afford. There was Sarah at 13, beaming in her confirmation dress that I'd sewn myself because store-bought was beyond our budget. In every picture, I saw love. In every memory, I remembered the joy of giving, the satisfaction of providing, the deep fulfillment that came from being needed. These children had been my world, my purpose, my reason for getting up every morning and facing another day of struggle. But when had love become obligation? When had gratitude become expectation? When had the natural flow of generosity from parent to child become a one-way river that never reached the sea? I closed the photo album and walked to my bedroom, where I kept a small wooden box under my bed. Inside were letters, notes my children had written over the years, thanking me for birthday presents, expressing appreciation for sacrifices made on their behalf, promising to take care of me when I got older. I read them in the lamplight, these artifacts from a time when my giving was met with genuine gratitude. Dear Mom, read one from David when he was 12, thank you for working so hard to buy my bike. I know you had to work extra hours, and I promise I'll take good care of it. I love you so much. Another from Sarah, written in her careful high school handwriting, Mom, I don't know how you do it, but you always make everything work. When I have children someday, I want to be just like you. Thank you for never giving up on us. The gulf between those heartfelt promises and the reality of today felt like a canyon I could never cross. What had happened to those grateful children? Where was the boy who promised to take good care of his bike, who now demanded thousands of dollars with the casual entitlement of someone who had never struggled for anything? Christmas morning arrived with the familiar sound of my radiator and the distant laughter of neighbors celebrating with their families. I sat alone with a cup of instant coffee, watching the snow fall past my window, covering the city in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new. My phone remained silent. No calls wishing me Merry Christmas. No messages checking on my health. No invitations to join family celebrations. I wondered if they were all together somewhere, sharing gifts and meals, laughing at inside jokes, creating new memories that didn't include the woman who had made their lives possible. In the afternoon, Sarah texted, "Thanks for Emma's laptop, Mom. She's so excited. Hope you have a nice Christmas." Hope you have a nice Christmas. Alone in my apartment, with no family, no company, no acknowledgement of the decades I'd spent making their Christmases magical. I stared at the message until the words blurred, feeling something crack inside my chest that had nothing to do with age or arthritis. That evening, Mrs. Rivera knocked on my door. Elena Rivera was my neighbor, a woman about my age who lived alone since her husband passed 2 years ago. She stood in my doorway holding a plate covered with foil, her kind eyes taking in my tear-stained face with immediate understanding. "Mija," she said softly, using the Spanish endearment that somehow felt warmer than anything my own children had called me in years, "I made too much food for one person. Would you like to share Christmas dinner with me?" I wanted to decline, to maintain the pretense that everything was fine, that I had family obligations, that someone was expecting me somewhere. But the kindness in her voice broke through my defenses, and I found myself nodding, following her into her apartment that smelled of roasted chicken and love. We ate together in companionable silence, two women who had learned that family isn't always blood, that connection can come from the most unexpected places. Elena didn't ask questions about my red eyes or my obvious loneliness. She simply shared her food and her presence, giving me the most precious gift I'd received in years, the experience of being seen, being valued, being treated as a human being worthy of kindness. "You know," Elena said as we cleared the dishes, "my children live in California now. They call once a month, maybe twice. They don't visit. They don't really know who I am anymore." She paused, her hands still in the soapy water. "But I've learned something important. We can't force love. We can't buy it or earn it or demand it. We can only decide what we're willing to accept." Her words settled in my mind like seeds in fertile soil. What was I willing to accept? What had I been accepting for so many years without questioning whether it was good enough, healthy enough, respectful enough? That night, I couldn't sleep again, but this time it wasn't from anxiety or sadness. It was from a growing sense of awareness, a shifting perspective that made me see my life through different eyes. I thought about Elena's words, about the difference between love and obligation, between family and people who happened to share my DNA. The next morning, I called my bank. "I'd like to freeze my savings account," I told the representative, my voice steadier than it had been in months. "I want to require 2 forms of identification and a waiting period for any withdrawals." "Is there a problem with the account, Mrs. Thompson?" "No," I said, looking at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. "I'm just starting to take better care of myself. When David called 2 days later asking about the Bitcoin investment, I surprised us both. No, David. I won't be investing in cryptocurrency. I've decided to keep my savings for my own needs. The silence on the line stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Mom, what are you talking about? This is a sure thing. You're being paranoid. I'm being careful with my own money. Your money? Mom, we're family. Family helps each other. You're right, I said. Family does help each other. When was the last time you helped me? Another silence, this one filled with the sound of his assumptions crumbling. What do you mean? I help you all the time. Name one thing you've done for me in the past year that wasn't related to asking for money. He couldn't. The silence stretched longer, filled with the weight of years of one-sided giving, of love that flowed in only one direction. Mom, you're being ridiculous. You're my mother. It's your job to help your children. And what's your job, David? What do you owe me? I hung up the phone before he could answer, my hands shaking not from fear but from the exhilaration of speaking truth for the first time in years. I had asked him a question he couldn't answer because he'd never considered it. In his mind, the parent-child relationship was a one-way street where mothers gave and children took, forever and without question. That afternoon, I made an appointment with a therapist at the community center in Harlem, something I never thought I'd do. The idea of discussing my family problems with a stranger felt like betrayal, like airing dirty laundry, like admitting failure as a mother. But Elena's words echoed in my mind, sometimes we need perspective from outside our pain to see clearly. Dr. Williams was a soft-spoken woman about 50, with gentle hands and eyes that had seen enough human struggle to recognize it without judgment. Her office was small but warm, filled with plants and soft lighting that made confession feel possible. Tell me about your family, she said, and for the first time in years, I told the truth. Not the sanitized version I presented to neighbors, not the rationalized excuses I made for my children's behavior, but the raw reality of feeling used, dismissed, and taken for granted by the people I loved most in the world. She listened without interruption as I described decades of giving without receiving, of being treated like a resource instead of a person, of watching my children grow into adults who seemed to have learned nothing about gratitude, respect, or reciprocal love. Margaret, she said when I finished, what do you think your children learned about relationships from watching you? The question hit me like a physical blow. What had they learned? They'd learned that mothers were inexhaustible sources of money and support. They'd learned that love meant always saying yes, never setting boundaries, never expressing needs of your own. They'd learned that respect was optional when dealing with family members who would forgive anything. I taught them to use me, I whispered, the words barely audible. You taught them that your needs didn't matter, she corrected gently. But it's not too late to teach them something different. Over the following weeks, I began the slow, difficult work of changing patterns that had dominated my life for decades. I practiced saying no. I role-played conversations where I expressed my own needs. I learned to recognize the difference between helping and enabling, between love and emotional manipulation. The first real test came when Sarah called asking for money for Emma's spring break trip. It's educational, Mom. She'll be working on a marine biology project in Florida. It's only $1,200. Only $1,200. There was that phrase again, minimizing a sum that represented weeks of my income, making my financial limitations seem unreasonable. Sarah, I can't afford $1,200 for a spring break trip. Mom, this is Emma we're talking about. Your granddaughter. Don't you want what's best for her? The guilt trip was automatic, practiced, designed to bypass my rational mind and strike directly at my maternal instincts. But I was learning to recognize these tactics, to name them for what they were. What I want is for Emma to learn that expensive trips aren't automatic entitlements. What I want is for you to find another way to fund this opportunity. This is so unlike you, Mom. What's gotten into you lately? What had gotten into me was 43 years of overlooked birthdays, dismissed concerns, and being treated like an appliance that should function silently in the background of their lives. What had gotten into me was the growing understanding that love without respect is not love at all. I'm learning to take care of myself, I said. By abandoning your family? By having boundaries. The conversation ended badly, with Sarah accusing me of becoming selfish and me struggling not to defend myself with decades of evidence to the contrary. But I held firm. Emma didn't go to Florida that spring, and somehow the world didn't end. My newfound resolve was tested again and again over the following months. David accused me of hoarding money while my family struggled. Sarah suggested I was having cognitive issues that affected my judgment. They tag-teamed me with emotional manipulation, alternating between guilt trips and angry demands. But something had fundamentally shifted inside me. Each conversation that used to leave me feeling guilty and small now left me feeling stronger and more certain. I was learning the difference between being needed and being used, between loving someone and being their emotional doormat. The breakthrough came during a family dinner at Sarah's house. I'd been invited, commanded, really, to attend what felt more like an intervention than a meal. David and Sarah sat across from me, their expressions serious, their tone suggesting they were dealing with a difficult child rather than their 73-year-old mother. "Mom, we need to talk," Sarah began. "We're concerned about you. This new attitude of yours isn't healthy." "What attitude would that be?" "This selfishness," David jumped in. "This sudden refusal to help your own family. It's not like you." They were right, it wasn't like me. The old me would have apologized by now, would have found a way to make their discomfort my responsibility, would have opened my wallet to restore peace. But the old me had been slowly dying for years under the weight of their exploitation. "You're right," I said calmly. "It's not like me to put my own needs first. I'm learning." "Learning what?" "To be a bad mother?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. A bad mother. After decades of sacrifice, of working multiple jobs, of going without so they could have, of being available for every crisis and emergency, I was being labeled a bad mother because I'd stopped funding their lifestyle choices. "A bad mother," I repeated slowly. "Is that what you think I've been?" "No, of course not," Sarah backtracked. "But this new version of you, this new version of me has boundaries. This new version of me expects to be treated with respect. This new version of me won't be taken for granted anymore." I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded paper, a list I'd been working on with Dr. Williams. "I want to read you something." David rolled his eyes. "Mom, please don't be dramatic. This is a list of every time I've given you money in the past 3 years. Every loan, every gift, every emergency contribution." I unfolded the paper, my voice growing stronger with each line. "David, $3,000 for your business idea. $500 for your car insurance. $800 for your rent when you were between jobs. $1,200 for your vacation to Miami." His face was reddening as the totals mounted. "Sarah, $2,000 for Emma's braces. $600 for your car repairs. $400 for your anniversary weekend. $800 for Emma's laptop last Christmas." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the wall clock and the distant sound of Emma playing video games upstairs. "The total amount is over $9,000 in 3 years. The amount you've repaid is 0. The number of times either of you has called just to ask how I'm doing, not to ask for money, is?" I paused, letting the silence speak for itself. 0. "Mom, that's not fair," Sarah protested. "We would have paid you back, when?" "Sarah, you make more money than I ever did in my entire working life." "David, you're 38 years old with a college education I paid for. When exactly would you have paid me back?" They squirmed in their chairs, looking like the children they used to be when caught in misbehavior. But these weren't children anymore. They were adults who had learned to manipulate their mother's love to fund their choices while contributing nothing to her life except demands and criticism. "I also want to read you something else," I continued, pulling out one of the old letters I'd found. "This is something David wrote to me when he was 12. I read his promise to take care of his bike, his gratitude for my extra work hours, his declaration of love. By the time I finished, his eyes were wet with tears that might have been genuine remorse or simple embarrassment at being confronted with his younger, more grateful self. "I don't understand what you want from us," Sarah said finally. "I want you to treat me like a human being instead of an ATM. I want you to call me because you miss me, not because you need something. I want you to remember that I have needs and feelings and limitations. I want you to understand that love is not a one-way street." "But you're our mother," David said, as if that explained everything. "Yes, I am. And you're my children. Which means this relationship should involve mutual care, mutual respect, mutual support. Right now, I'm the only one giving anything to this family." Emma wandered into the dining room, drawn by the tension in adult voices. At 16, she was old enough to understand the dynamics that had shaped her family's expectations. She'd grown up watching her mother and uncle treat their grandmother like a bank, learning that love was measured by what you could extract from people. "Grandma? Are you okay?" she asked, her young face concerned in a way that her parents hadn't been throughout this entire conversation. "I'm learning to be okay, sweetheart," I told her. "I'm learning that it's important to stand up for yourself, even with people you love." Emma glanced between her mother and uncle, understanding dawning in her expression. She was smart enough to see what the adults had been blind to, that their family dynamics were unhealthy, unsustainable, and unfair. "Maybe I don't need that Florida trip," she said quietly. "Maybe I could earn some of the money myself." Her suggestion fell into the room like a stone into still water, creating ripples of awareness. Here was a 16-year-old displaying more maturity and consideration than either of my adult children had shown in years. I left that dinner feeling lighter than I had in years. I'd spoken my truth, set my boundaries, and refused to be manipulated by guilt or accusations. The old Margaret would have apologized her way out of the room, promising to return to her role as the family's financial safety net. The new Margaret walked to her car with her head held high. But I knew the real test was yet to come. Confronting your children is one thing, maintaining new boundaries when they push back is another entirely. And push back they did. David stopped calling altogether, as if my refusal to fund his investment dreams had severed our relationship entirely. Sarah called, but only to report on my increasingly difficult behavior and to suggest, again, that I might be experiencing cognitive decline. The isolation was painful. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I'd made a mistake, if holding on to my money was worth losing my family. The old patterns of guilt and self-doubt crept in during the dark hours, whispering that maybe they were right, maybe I was being selfish, maybe a good mother would just give them what they wanted. But then I'd remember Elena's words about what we're willing to accept. I'd think about Dr. Williams' gentle questions about what my children had learned from my behavior. I'd look at my bank account and see, for the first time in years, enough money to cover my own needs without anxiety. Spring arrived early that year, filling Central Park with green life and possibility. I started taking walks there, something I hadn't done in years. Without the constant stress of financial worry, without the weight of everyone else's problems on my shoulders, I found myself noticing things I'd forgotten existed, the way morning light filtered through new leaves, the sound of children playing, the simple pleasure of moving through the world without carrying everyone else's burdens. One afternoon in May, I was sitting on a bench watching people feed ducks in the pond when my phone rang. Emma's name appeared on the screen, and my heart jumped with hope and fear in equal measure. "Hi, Grandma," she said, her voice uncertain. "I was wondering, could I come visit you?" "Just me, I mean. Not with Mom and Uncle David." "Of course, sweetheart. You're always welcome here. I wanted to talk to you about some things. About what happened at dinner that night. About how we've been treating you." An hour later, Emma sat in my small living room, her teenage awkwardness amplified by the weight of the conversation she'd initiated. She fidgeted with her phone case, looking everywhere except directly at me. "Grandma, I need to apologize to you." "Honey, you don't." "Yes, I do." Her voice was stronger now, more determined. "I've been thinking about what you said at dinner. About all the money you gave us. About how nobody calls just to check on you." She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I never called just to check on you either." My throat tightened with emotion. Here was my granddaughter, still a child herself, showing more emotional maturity than her mother and uncle combined. "I never thought about it before," she continued. "How lonely you might be. How hard it might be to always be the one giving money to everyone else. How it might feel to have your birthday forgotten or to spend Christmas alone." She'd spent Christmas alone? Sarah had told me Emma was at a sleepover, but seeing my granddaughter's face now, I wondered what other lies had been told to excuse my absence from family gatherings. "I did spend Christmas alone," I admitted. "But I had a lovely dinner with my neighbor Mrs. Rivera. She reminds me that family isn't always blood." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Mom always says family comes first, but she only seems to mean that when she needs something from you. When you need something, or when you're sad, or when you might want to spend time with us, then suddenly family isn't as important anymore." The wisdom of youth, unfiltered by years of rationalization and excuse-making. Emma could see clearly what her elders had obscured with guilt, obligation, and entitlement. "I want to do better," she said. "I want to be the kind of granddaughter who calls you just because she misses you. Who visits you because she enjoys your company, not because she needs something. Who remembers your birthday and asks about your health and cares about your feelings." I started crying then, not the bitter tears of hurt and disappointment I'd shed so many nights alone, but tears of gratitude and hope. This girl, this young woman really, was offering me something I'd almost given up believing existed, genuine love, freely given, with no strings attached. "Would you like to learn how to cook some of my old recipes?" I asked. "Things your mother used to love when she was your age?" Emma's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "Really? That would be amazing." We spent the next 3 hours in my tiny kitchen, measuring ingredients and sharing stories. I taught her how to make my mother's tamale recipe, explaining each step while telling her about her great-grandmother, about the struggles of immigration and adaptation, about the way food carries love across generations. Emma listened with the intensity of someone starved for real connection, real conversation, real relationship. She asked questions about my childhood, my dreams, my experiences as a young mother. For the first time in years, someone wanted to know about my life not because they needed something from it, but because they cared about me as a person. As we worked together, I realized this was what I'd been missing, not just the giving of myself, but the receiving of genuine interest and affection. Emma's presence in my kitchen felt like sunlight after a long winter, warming parts of my heart I'd forgotten existed. When David and Sarah found out about Emma's visit, their reactions were swift and predictable. Sarah called, her voice tight with control and disapproval. "Mom, I don't appreciate you involving Emma in our family issues." "I didn't involve her in anything. She came to see me because she wanted to. She's a child." She doesn't understand the full situation. She understands that she has a grandmother who loves her and whom she hasn't been taught to appreciate. She understands that relationships should involve mutual care and respect. Maybe she understands more than the adults in this family do. The conversation went downhill from there, with Sarah accusing me of manipulating Emma and me finally saying something I'd wanted to say for years. Sarah, you learned to treat me badly by watching how you were never corrected when you did it. Emma is learning something different by watching me stand up for myself. Maybe she'll grow up knowing how to have healthy relationships. David's response was more direct and more cruel. He left a voicemail that I almost deleted without listening to, but something made me press play. Mom, this has gone far enough. If you want to play games with your own family, that's your choice. But don't drag Emma into your mental breakdown. And don't expect us to keep pretending that your behavior is normal. You're acting crazy, and everybody can see it except you. Mental breakdown. Crazy. The words were designed to make me doubt my own sanity, to convince me that setting boundaries and demanding respect were symptoms of psychological illness rather than signs of psychological health. For a moment, the old Margaret surfaced, wondering if maybe I was overreacting, if maybe I should apologize and return to my role as the family's silent supporter. But then I thought about Emma in my kitchen, asking genuine questions and showing genuine interest. I thought about Elena sharing Christmas dinner with me. I thought about Dr. Williams nodding with understanding as I described years of feeling unvalued and unseen. The people who saw me clearly, who treated me with respect, didn't think I was crazy. The only people calling me mentally ill were the ones who had benefited from my previous willingness to accept poor treatment. That revelation was like a key turning in a lock I hadn't even realized existed. My children weren't concerned about my mental health, they were concerned about losing their financial resource. They weren't worried about me, they were worried about themselves. Summer arrived with a heat wave that made my unair-conditioned apartment feel like an oven, but for the first time in years, I had enough money saved to buy a small window unit. I no longer had to choose between comfort and financial security because I was no longer funding other people's comfort at the expense of my own. Emma visited regularly throughout the summer, sometimes bringing friends who were curious about the grandmother who seemed so different from their own family experiences. We cooked together, watched old movies, and had conversations that ranged from serious discussions about life and relationships to silly debates about favorite ice cream flavors. Through Emma's eyes, I began to see myself not as a failed mother or a selfish old woman, but as a person with interesting stories, valuable wisdom, and deep reserves of love that had been misdirected for too many years. One evening in July, as Emma and I sat on my fire escape watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of gold and pink, she asked me a question that stopped my heart. Grandma, are you happier now? I considered the question carefully. Was I happier? I was certainly lonelier in some ways. Months had passed without meaningful contact from David or Sarah. Family gatherings were a thing of the past. Holidays were quieter, smaller, sometimes solitary. But I was also free from the constant anxiety about money, free from the crushing weight of everyone else's problems, free from the exhausting cycle of giving and receiving nothing in return. I slept better. I ate meals I enjoyed instead of whatever was cheapest. I bought books instead of borrowing them, decent shoes instead of wearing ones with holes. Yes, I said finally. I am happier. It's a different kind of happiness than I expected, but it's real. Good, she said simply. You deserve to be happy. You deserve to be happy. 6 words my own children had never said, spoken by my 16-year-old granddaughter with the casual certainty of someone who had been raised to believe that happiness was everyone's birthright, not something you earn through endless sacrifice. August brought an unexpected challenge. Sarah called, her voice trembling with what sounded like genuine emotion. Mom, I need your help. Not money, she added quickly. I need your advice. Despite everything that had happened, my maternal instincts still responded to that tone. What's wrong, honey? It's Emma. She's been different since she started spending time with you. More argumentative. More difficult. She questions everything now, challenges our decisions, acts like she knows better than her parents. I almost laughed at the irony. Emma was displaying the same boundary-setting behavior that Sarah had labeled as mental illness in me, but now she was experiencing the discomfort of being on the receiving end. What kinds of things is she challenging? Everything. When I told her she couldn't go to a party last weekend, she asked me to explain my reasoning instead of just accepting my decision. When her father and I discussed taking a vacation, she asked why we could afford a cruise but couldn't afford to pay you back the money we owe you. There it was. Emma had internalized the lessons of our summer together, learning to think critically about fairness, respect, and accountability. She'd started applying those lessons to her own family relationships. She sounds like she's learning to think for herself, I said carefully. She sounds like she's learning to be disrespectful to her parents. Is asking for explanations disrespectful? Is pointing out financial inconsistencies disrespectful? Or is she just learning that it's okay to expect honesty and fairness in relationships? The silence stretched between us, filled with years of unexamined assumptions about authority, respect, and family dynamics. Sarah had grown up in a household where questioning parental decisions was discouraged, where respect was a one-way street flowing upward through generations. Now her daughter was modeling a different approach, one where respect was mutual and authority earned rather than automatically granted. "I don't know how to handle this new version of her," Sarah admitted finally. "The same way you should have been handling me all these years," I said gently. "By listening to her concerns, explaining your decisions, and treating her like a person whose thoughts and feelings matter." "But she's 16. She's not an adult." "No, but she's learning how to become one. And the lessons she's learning now will shape what kind of adult she becomes." "Do you want her to grow up believing that love means accepting poor treatment? Or do you want her to know that she deserves to be respected by the people who claim to love her?" Another silence, this one heavier with implications. Sarah was confronting the same choice I'd faced months earlier: continue patterns that felt familiar but were ultimately destructive, or do the hard work of changing long-established dynamics. "I don't know how to change," she whispered, and for the first time in our conversation, I heard my daughter instead of my critic. "Start small," I suggested. "Start by asking Emma how she feels instead of telling her how she should feel. Start by explaining your decisions instead of demanding blind obedience. Start by apologizing when you make mistakes instead of pretending parents are infallible. Like you did with us?" The question went straight to my heart. "Yes, exactly. I made mistakes with you and David. I taught you that mothers should accept poor treatment, that love means always saying yes, that family relationships don't require mutual respect. I'm trying to teach Emma something different." That conversation marked a turning point I hadn't expected. Over the following weeks, Sarah began making small changes in how she communicated with Emma and, gradually, with me. She started explaining her financial decisions instead of dismissing my concerns. She began asking about my health and interests instead of immediately launching into requests for help. The changes were small and sometimes inconsistent, but they were real. It was like watching someone learn a new language, halting, imperfect, but genuinely trying to communicate in ways that had never been modeled for her. David, however, remained entrenched in his anger and sense of entitlement. Months passed without any communication from him, and when he finally called in September, it wasn't to apologize or seek reconciliation. "Mom, I need you to co-sign a loan for me. It's for a house, a real investment this time. Something that will actually build wealth instead of just getting spent on nothing." Getting spent on nothing. Like my medication, my rent, my food, all the nothing that kept me alive and housed and healthy. "No, David. You haven't even heard the details yet." "I don't need to hear the details. I won't be co-signing any loans." "Mom, this is important. This could change my whole life. I could build real wealth, the kind of assets that would let me take care of you when you get older." Take care of me when I get older. At 73, I was already older. I was already in need of care, consideration, and support. But the care he was promising was hypothetical, contingent on my enabling his dreams with my financial backing. "David, I am older. I need care now. When was the last time you asked how I'm doing? When was the last time you visited just to spend time with me? When was the last time you offered to help me with anything?" "That's different. You're fine. You don't really need anything." "I don't really need anything." Apparently, I didn't need company, conversation, affection, or respect. According to my son, I was fine living in isolation as long as I remained available to fund his aspirations. "What I need is a relationship with my son that isn't based on money. What I need is to be treated like a person instead of a bank. What I need is for you to care about my well-being instead of just my wallet." "You're being dramatic, Mom. I care about you." "Prove it. Come visit me. Take me to lunch. Ask about my health. Show interest in my life. Call me on my birthday. Do any of the things that people who care about each other actually do." I don't have time for all that emotional stuff. I'm trying to build a life here. Emotional stuff. Like the emotional stuff I'd provided for him every day of his childhood: comfort when he was scared, encouragement when he was discouraged, celebration when he succeeded, support when he failed. All of that caring, all of those years of emotional labor, had been reduced to stuff that he didn't have time for. "Then build it without my financial support," I said, and hung up the phone. The autumn months passed quietly. Emma continued her regular visits, bringing school stories and boy problems and college dreams. Elena and I developed a friendship based on shared meals, afternoon walks, and the comfortable companionship of two women who had learned to value themselves. I joined a book club at the library, something I'd wanted to do for years but had never had time for when everyone else's needs filled my schedule. I discovered that I had opinions about literature, that other people found my perspectives interesting, that I could contribute to conversations about something other than family problems or financial stress. Dr. Williams and I met less frequently now, our sessions focused more on maintaining healthy boundaries than establishing them. I'd learned to recognize manipulation tactics, to distinguish between genuine emergencies and manufactured crises, to say no without guilt or extensive justification. But the real test was yet to come. In October, Sarah called with news that made my blood run cold. "Mom, David's been arrested. He's in jail, and he needs bail money. It's $20,000. $20,000. A sum so far beyond my means it might as well have been $1 million. $20,000 that represented more than a year of my Social Security income, more than my entire savings account, more than I could access even if I wanted to. What was he arrested for? Some kind of fraud charge. Something about his business dealings. Mom, he says it's all a misunderstanding, that he can clear it up if he can just get out on bail. Fraud charges. My son, the one who had been pressuring me for investment money, who had been describing get-rich-quick schemes with increasing urgency, who had become angry when I started protecting my assets, had been arrested for fraud. The old Margaret would have found a way. Would have mortgaged her apartment, borrowed against her life insurance, sold everything she owned to get her child out of jail. The old Margaret would have believed that a mother's love was measured by her willingness to sacrifice everything for her children, regardless of their choices or behavior. "I don't have $20,000, I said simply. "You could get a loan. You could mortgage your apartment." "Mom, this is David we're talking about. Your son. He's sitting in jail right now." "Yes, he is. Because of choices he made. Because of actions he took. Not because of anything I did or failed to do. I can't believe you're abandoning him like this." Abandoning him. Like I'd abandoned him by not funding his cryptocurrency dreams, by not co-signing loans I couldn't afford, by not continuing to enable financial irresponsibility that had apparently escalated into criminal behavior. I'm not abandoning him. I'm not rescuing him. There's a difference. Sarah hung up on me, but not before delivering a parting shot. "Don't expect us to be there for you when you need us." I sat in my quiet apartment, processing the threat. Don't expect them to be there when I need them, as if they had ever been there when I needed them. As if their absence from my life would be a loss rather than a continuation of the status quo. Later that evening, Emma called. Her voice was small, frightened by the adult crisis that had erupted in her family. "Grandma, Mom says Uncle David is in jail. She says you won't help him. She says you're being selfish." My heart broke for this girl who was being forced to navigate adult complications with teenage understanding. Emma loved her uncle, despite his flaws. She was being asked to choose sides in a conflict she didn't fully understand. "Emma, can I ask you a question?" "Okay. If you lent money to a friend, and that friend never paid you back, and then that friend asked to borrow more money, what would you do?" She was quiet for a moment, processing the hypothetical. "I guess I wouldn't lend them more money." "Why not?" "Because they already proved they wouldn't pay me back. And because I might need my money for my own stuff." That's very wise thinking. Now, what if that friend called you selfish for not lending them more money? What if they said you were abandoning them by protecting your own money? Another pause. "That would be unfair, I think. It would be their own fault for not paying me back the first time." "You're exactly right. Now, your Uncle David has borrowed money from me many times over the years. He's never paid any of it back. And now he wants me to give him $20,000 I don't have, for a legal problem that resulted from his own choices." Oh. The understanding in her voice was clear. "So when Mom says you're being selfish, she's asking me to set myself on fire to keep someone else warm. She's asking me to risk my security, my housing, my ability to take care of myself, to rescue someone who has never shown any concern for my well-being." Emma was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger, more certain. "I think you're making the right choice, Grandma. I think Uncle David needs to figure this out himself. What does your mother think about your opinion?" "She doesn't want to hear my opinion. She says I don't understand because I'm too young. But I understand that you didn't commit fraud. I understand that you didn't make the choices that got Uncle David in trouble. And I understand that it's not fair to ask you to give up everything to fix someone else's mistakes." This 16-year-old girl had grasped concepts that her mother and uncle, despite being decades older, continued to resist. Emma understood accountability, consequences, and the difference between love and enabling. Over the following weeks, the family pressure intensified. Sarah called daily, alternating between emotional manipulation and angry accusations. David called from jail, his voice a mixture of desperation and entitlement, demanding that I find a way to raise the bail money. "I'm your son," he kept saying, as if genetic connection trumped all other considerations. Family helps family. But family, I'd learned, was supposed to be a reciprocal relationship. David had never helped me when I was struggling financially. He'd never offered support during my health scares or emotional difficulties. He'd never treated me with the consideration and respect he now demanded I show him. The turning point came when Sarah suggested I sell my apartment to raise David's bail money. "It's just money, Mom. You can find another place to live. This is David's life we're talking about. Just money. My home of 42 years, my only asset, my security in old age, all dismissed as just money that I should gladly sacrifice for a son who had never sacrificed anything for me. Sarah, this apartment isn't just money to me. It's my home. It's my stability. It's my security in old age. It's the only thing I have left after decades of giving everything else to my children. So you're choosing an apartment over your son?" "I'm choosing myself over continuing to enable destructive behavior. I'm choosing my own security over funding someone else's poor choices. I'm choosing to stop setting myself on fire to keep other people warm." That night, I called Dr. Williams for an emergency session. The pressure from my family was wearing me down, making me question my resolve, filling me with the old familiar guilt that had controlled me for so many years. "Margaret, let me ask you something," she said after I described the latest demands and accusations. "If David weren't your son, if he were just an acquaintance who had repeatedly borrowed money without repaying it, who had shown no interest in your well-being, who is now in jail for fraud and demanding that you sell your home to bail him out, what would you do?" The answer was obvious. I would refuse without a moment's hesitation. I would recognize the situation as an attempt to exploit my kindness, and I would protect myself without guilt or apology. "But he is my son," I said weakly. "Yes, he is. And being your son means he should treat you better than an acquaintance would, not worse. Being your son means he should be more concerned about your well-being, not less. Being family should elevate the standard of treatment, not lower it." Her words cut through the fog of guilt and obligation that had clouded my thinking. David wasn't asking for help, he was demanding sacrifice. He wasn't expressing love, he was exercising control. He wasn't treating me like his mother, he was treating me like his property. The pressure campaign continued for another month. Extended family members I hadn't heard from in years suddenly called to express their concern about David's situation and their disappointment in my response. Friends of Sarah's reached out to tell me how heartbroken she was by my selfishness. Even my parish priest, undoubtedly given a one-sided version of events, suggested that Christian charity demanded I help my son in his time of need. But Emma remained my anchor to sanity and truth. She continued her regular visits, unfazed by her mother's displeasure, steadfast in her support of my decision. Her presence in my life reminded me daily that healthy relationships were possible, that love didn't require self-destruction, that respect was a reasonable expectation. In November, David's case went to trial. I wasn't there. Sarah had made it clear that my presence wasn't welcome unless it came with a checkbook. I learned the outcome from a brief, cold phone call. David was convicted of investment fraud and sentenced to 2 years in prison. The fraud charges revealed a pattern of behavior that explained his increasing desperation for money. He'd been running investment scams, promising unrealistic returns to investors while using their money for personal expenses. The Bitcoin opportunities he described to me, the stock market investments he'd wanted me to fund, all had been covers for fraudulent schemes. I felt a mixture of sadness and vindication. Sadness for the son I'd raised, who had somehow learned to see other people as resources to be exploited rather than human beings deserving of honesty and respect. Vindication that my instincts had been correct, that my refusal to fund his opportunities had protected me from becoming another victim of his crimes. Sarah blamed me for David's conviction. If I had provided the bail money, she argued, he could have gotten a better lawyer, negotiated a better plea deal, somehow avoided prison entirely. In her mind, my refusal to sacrifice my security had directly caused her brother's downfall. But Emma saw the situation more clearly. "Mom keeps saying it's your fault Uncle David is in prison," she told me during one of our cooking sessions. "But isn't he in prison because he stole money from people? Isn't that his own fault?" Yes, it was David's fault. It was his choice to commit crimes, his decision to defraud investors, his responsibility to face the consequences. My only choice had been whether to enable his behavior or protect myself, whether to continue funding his increasingly suspicious schemes or finally say no. Christmas approached again, marking a full year since David's cruel words about getting a job had started my journey toward self-respect. This year, I wasn't alone with instant coffee and painful memories. Emma and I planned to spend Christmas Day together, cooking traditional recipes and watching classic movies. Elena invited us to join her for Christmas Eve dinner with her church group, a collection of older adults who had formed their own chosen family based on mutual support and genuine care. For the first time in years, I looked forward to the holidays instead of dreading them. 3 days before Christmas, Sarah called with an unexpected request. Her voice was subdued, lacking the anger and accusation that had characterized our conversations for months. "Mom, would it be okay if I came to see you? Not to ask for anything, just to talk." I was surprised but cautiously hopeful. "Of course, Sarah. You're always welcome here." She arrived looking older than her 40 years, worn down by months of family crisis and the gradual realization that her brother's problems were beyond anyone's ability to fix. We sat in my small living room, the space feeling larger without the weight of unspoken demands and accumulated resentment. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began hesitantly. "About how we've treated you over the years. About the money, and the phone calls, and everything." I waited, not wanting to interrupt what felt like the beginning of a real conversation. "Emma has been helping me see things differently. She asks a lot of questions now, questions that make me uncomfortable because I don't have good answers." "What kinds of questions?" "Like why we never visit you just to visit. Why we never call just to see how you're doing. Why we always need something from you, but we never ask what you need from us." These were exactly the questions Emma should be asking, the kind of critical thinking that would serve her well in all her future relationships. She also asked me when was the last time I did something nice for you. Something to make you happy, not because I wanted something in return. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I couldn't answer her, "Mom. I couldn't think of a single time in recent years when I'd done something just to make you smile." The admission hung in the air between us, heavy with years of one-sided giving and taking. But instead of feeling vindicated or angry, I felt sad for both of us, for me, because I'd missed so many years of having a real relationship with my daughter, and for her, because she'd missed the joy of genuine generosity. "I want to do better," she continued. "I want Emma to see what a healthy relationship between mothers and daughters looks like. I want her to learn to give as well as receive. I want..." She paused, struggling with words that had never been easy for her to say. "I want to learn how to love you the way you've loved us. Not just taking your love for granted, but actually showing love back." For the first time in our adult relationship, Sarah was seeing me as a person with needs, feelings, and rights instead of just as her mother whose primary function was to provide support. It was a beginning, fragile and uncertain, but real. "I don't know how to fix everything that's been wrong," she admitted. "I don't know how to undo years of taking you for granted. But I want to try." We talked for 3 hours that afternoon. Sarah asked about my life, my interests, my health, my dreams for the future. She listened without interrupting when I described the loneliness of the past few years, the hurt of being treated like an ATM, the fear that I'd raised children who didn't actually love me as a person. She apologized, not the defensive, qualified apologies I'd heard before, but genuine expressions of regret for specific behaviors and their impact on me. She acknowledged that she'd learned to treat me poorly because I'd never required better treatment, but she also took responsibility for being an adult who should have recognized the unfairness without needing to be confronted. "I keep thinking about how Emma treats you," she said as our conversation wound down. "The way she lights up when she talks about visiting you. The way she genuinely enjoys your company. The way she asks about your life because she actually cares about the answers. She's learning what real relationships look like," I said. "She's learning that love is mutual, that respect is essential, that people have value beyond what they can provide for you." "I never learned those things," Sarah admitted. "Or maybe I learned them and forgot them. Either way, I'm learning them now, watching Emma, listening to her questions, seeing how much happier you are since you started standing up for yourself." As Sarah prepared to leave, she turned back with one more question. "Mom, would you be willing to spend Christmas with us this year? Not because we need anything from you, but because Emma and I would really like your company." I looked into her eyes and saw something I hadn't seen in years: genuine affection, real invitation, the desire for my presence rather than my resources. It wasn't the same daughter who had demanded money for Emma's laptop a year ago. This was someone who was learning to see relationships differently, to value connection over transaction. "I'd like that," I said, meaning it completely. Christmas at Sarah's house was different from any family gathering in recent memory. Emma had made place cards with thoughtful messages, Sarah had prepared foods she knew I enjoyed, and the conversation centered around sharing memories and expressing gratitude rather than discussing problems or making requests. For the first time in years, I felt like a welcomed guest rather than an obligated provider. Sarah asked about my book club, my cooking classes with Emma, my friendship with Elena. She listened with genuine interest as I described my new routines, my growing confidence, my sense of finally living for myself instead of constantly managing everyone else's needs. After dinner, Emma gave me a gift that brought tears to my eyes, a photo album she'd made chronicling our cooking adventures together. Each page contained not just pictures, but her handwritten notes about what she'd learned, how she felt, what the time together meant to her. "You taught me that cooking is about more than food," she'd written on the first page. "You taught me that taking time to care for someone is how you show love. You taught me that every person has value and stories worth hearing." Sarah gave me something equally precious, a letter expressing her commitment to building a real relationship based on mutual respect and genuine care. She outlined specific changes she wanted to make, ways she intended to support me instead of just drawing from me, plans for spending time together that didn't involve financial transactions. "I know you don't need anything from me," she wrote. "You've proven you can take care of yourself just fine. But I'm hoping you might want something from me, my time, my attention, my genuine interest in your life. I'm hoping you might want a daughter who calls just to hear your voice, who visits just to enjoy your company, who treats you like the amazing woman you are instead of just the mother who raised her." It was the best Christmas gift I'd received in 40 years. The new year brought gradual but meaningful changes. Sarah called regularly, not to ask for anything but to share news, seek advice on parenting challenges, or simply chat about daily life. She invited me to Emma's school events, included me in family celebrations, and began treating me like an honored family member rather than a service provider. Emma continued her regular visits, but now Sarah joined us sometimes, learning to cook alongside her daughter, hearing family stories she'd never asked about before, discovering that her mother was a complex, interesting person beyond her maternal role. The transformation wasn't perfect or complete. There were moments when old patterns surfaced, when Sarah caught herself beginning to make demands rather than requests, when she had to consciously choose consideration over entitlement. But the effort was genuine and consistent. David remained in prison, his letters alternating between self-pity and continued attempts to manipulate family members into supporting him financially. Sarah initially wanted to send him money for commissary expenses, but Emma's pointed questions about rewarding bad behavior helped her mother recognize that even small forms of enabling could perpetuate unhealthy dynamics. If Uncle David learns that going to prison just means family members send him money to make his life easier, what is he really learning? Emma asked. It was a sophisticated understanding of consequences and accountability that impressed both Sarah and me. Spring brought new opportunities. I joined a senior walking group, started volunteering at the community center's literacy program, and began taking art classes I'd dreamed about for decades. The time I'd once spent worrying about my children's problems was now filled with activities that enriched my own life and connected me with people who saw my value. Elena and I traveled to Philadelphia to visit the art museum, my first vacation in over 20 years. I could afford it because I was no longer funding other people's financial emergencies. I enjoyed it because I was no longer weighed down by guilt about spending money on myself. The woman who returned from that weekend trip was unrecognizable from the one who had sat alone the previous Christmas Eve, holding a chipped mug and absorbing cruel words about needing to get a job. This woman walked with confidence, laughed easily, and radiated the peace that comes from finally putting your own oxygen mask on first. Summer brought David's first letter that didn't ask for money. Instead, he wrote about the prison programs he joined, the counseling sessions that were helping him understand his behavior patterns, and his growing awareness of how his actions had affected other people. "I'm starting to realize that I treated you badly for a long time," he wrote. "I took your love for granted and saw you as someone who existed to solve my problems instead of as a person with your own needs and feelings. I don't expect you to forgive me or help me anymore. I just wanted you to know that I'm finally understanding what I did wrong." It was a beginning, not of resumed financial support or automatic reconciliation, but of possible accountability and growth. Whether David's insights would translate into genuine change remained to be seen, but the letter represented more emotional maturity than he'd shown in years. By autumn of my second year of self-respect, the changes in my life were visible to everyone who knew me. I'd gained weight I'd lost during the stressful years of financial worry. My apartment was brighter and more comfortable, furnished with things I'd chosen for my own pleasure instead of making do with cast-offs and necessities. Most importantly, my relationships had transformed. Sarah and Emma were regular, genuine presences in my life. Elena and I had become close friends who supported each other through challenges and celebrated each other's joys. My book club, walking group, and volunteer activities connected me with people who valued my contributions and enjoyed my company. The phone calls that once filled me with dread, "What do they need now? How will I find the money? How can I say yes again?" had been replaced by conversations that brought genuine pleasure. People called because they missed me, because they wanted to share good news, because they valued my perspective on their lives. Do you know what it's like to be needed instead of used? To be valued instead of exploited? To have your boundaries respected instead of constantly tested? It's like learning to breathe properly after years of holding your breath. Standing on my fire escape that October evening, watching the sun set over the city that had been my home for so many decades, I reflected on the journey from that painful Christmas Eve to this moment of peace and fulfillment. The woman who had absorbed David's cruelty and Sarah's indifference had discovered her own worth. The mother who had sacrificed everything for children who gave nothing in return had learned to demand reciprocity. The old woman who had felt invisible and discarded had found her voice and her value. The transformation hadn't been easy. There were nights of doubt, days of loneliness, moments of wavering when the old patterns called seductively. There were family members who accused me of selfishness, friends who suggested I was being too harsh, voices that whispered I should settle for crumbs of affection rather than demanding full meals of respect. But I'd learned to distinguish between loneliness and solitude, between being needed and being used, between family obligation and healthy relationship. I discovered that saying no to poor treatment made room for good treatment, that protecting my resources allowed me to be genuinely generous instead of desperately enabling. Most importantly, I'd learned that it's never too late to change, never too late to demand better, never too late to choose yourself. At 74, I was finally living my own life instead of existing as a supporting character in everyone else's story. The sunset painted the sky in shades of golden salmon, and I raised a glass of wine to toast the woman I'd become. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new opportunities to practice the self-respect I'd learned so late in life. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, in my own home, living by my own values, surrounded by people who saw my worth. As darkness settled over the city, I thought about all the other mothers, fathers, grandparents, and family members who might be struggling with similar dynamics, wondering if they were wrong to want respect, questioning whether they deserved better treatment, afraid that setting boundaries meant choosing loneliness. To them, I want to say this: you are not selfish for having needs. You are not dramatic for expecting respect. You are not abandoning your family by refusing to enable destructive behavior. You are not too old to change, too set in your ways to demand better, too dependent on others' approval to stand up for yourself. Love that requires you to diminish yourself is not love. Family that treats you worse than they treat strangers is not functioning healthily. Relationships that leave you feeling drained, used, and unappreciated are relationships worth changing or leaving. You deserve to be seen, valued, and respected by the people you love. You deserve to have your sacrifices acknowledged rather than expected. You deserve to be cared for emotionally, not just used financially. You deserve to matter as a person, not just as a provider. The path to self-respect isn't easy, especially when you're changing patterns that have existed for decades. There will be pushback from people who benefited from your previous willingness to accept poor treatment. There will be accusations of selfishness from people who depended on your selflessness. There will be guilt, doubt, and moments of wavering. But there will also be peace, genuine relationships, and the deep satisfaction that comes from finally putting your own oxygen mask on first. There will be mornings when you wake up looking forward to your day instead of dreading the latest crisis or demand. There will be evenings when you reflect on your life with contentment instead of resentment. Most importantly, there will be the example you set for younger generations, showing them that love includes respect, that family members should treat each other well, that it's never acceptable to exploit someone's kindness or take their sacrifices for granted. Emma learned these lessons by watching me change. She learned that boundaries are healthy, that mutual respect is essential, that love without reciprocity isn't really love at all. She'll carry these lessons into her own relationships, creating healthier patterns that will benefit her throughout her life. This is perhaps the greatest gift of my transformation, not just the peace I've found for myself, but the model I've provided for future generations. Emma will know how to demand respect because she watched me learn to demand it. She'll know how to set boundaries because she saw me establish them. She'll know that she matters as a person because she watched me discover my own worth. The ripple effects of self-respect extend far beyond the person who claims it. When you stop accepting poor treatment, you create space for good treatment. When you model healthy boundaries, you teach others how to create their own. When you demonstrate that everyone deserves respect, you help heal broken patterns that might have continued for generations. My story isn't unique. Across the world, in countless families, there are people struggling with similar dynamics, giving endlessly while receiving little, sacrificing constantly while being taken for granted, loving wholly while being respected partially. If my journey resonates with you, if you recognize yourself in the woman who sat alone that Christmas Eve, if you've ever wondered whether you deserve better than what you're receiving, I want you to know that change is possible at any age, in any situation, with any family. It starts with recognizing your own worth. It continues with setting boundaries that protect your well-being. It deepens through relationships with people who see your value and treat you accordingly. It flourishes when you finally understand that taking care of yourself isn't selfish, it's essential. Have you lived something similar to what I've shared? Have you ever felt used by people who claim to love you? Have you ever wondered if setting boundaries would cost you relationships, only to discover that healthy boundaries actually create better relationships? I invite you to share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Your courage in speaking up might give another person permission to demand better for themselves. And if this story has touched you, if it's given you hope or perspective or simply made you feel less alone in your struggles, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. It helps me reach other people who might need to hear that they're worth more than they've been accepting, that it's never too late to change, that respect and love should go together. Your support allows me to keep opening my heart, sharing these difficult truths, and creating space for conversations that can heal generations of unhealthy patterns. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for seeing my worth, even when my own family couldn't. Thank you for understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable poor behavior, even when that behavior comes from people you die for. Remember, you matter. Your needs are valid. Your feelings are important. You deserve to be treated with kindness and respect by everyone in your life, especially by the people who claim to love you most. And if you're still sitting alone with a chipped mug, absorbing cruel words from people who should treasure you, know this: your story doesn't have to end there. You can choose yourself. You can demand better. You can discover that the life you've been living for everyone else can finally become the life you live for you. The sun will rise tomorrow on whatever choice you make. Make it one that honors your worth, protects your peace, and creates space for the love and respect you've always deserved.